this morning is a bit of an insight into Paul and Timothy and into their relationship and the dynamic that played out between the two. My real hope from today is that you leave here with some prompts, really, to go and do the same, to go and imitate their relationship. But before we get tore in, I'd like to ask you guys what stood out to you in recent weeks, because I'm aware that as a congregation you have been on a journey with Paul. So maybe just 1, 2 of you, possibly 3 if you're feeling a bit brave. What stood out to you about Paul? Don't rush. His dedication to discipleship, or his dedication as a discipleship? As a disciple, his dedication. His dedication as a disciple. Any others? He had a father's heart. You don't often associate that with Paul, do you? He's kind of big on social change and challenging everybody, but it's easy to miss that he was hugely pastoral. One more. His conversion. Pretty dramatic, eh? Yeah? Show of hands if your conversion's like Paul's. I mean, mine's is a wee bit. Darkness to light and all that. So Paul writes to the church in Corinth, and he says this: "Therefore, I urge you to imitate me. For this reason I have sent to you Timothy, my son whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord, and he will remind you of my ways of life in Christ Jesus, which agrees with what I teach everywhere and in every church." So that's in 1 Corinthians 4, 16 and 17 for those of you who are keen to read along. And what we see in these just 2 verses, in this one verse, is Paul's template, if you like, of discipleship. Right? So he says, imitate me, and for this very reason I'm sending you Timothy. And Timothy's going to instruct you in the things of my life and how I live. So you see from the get-go, Paul's laying out a bit of a template here. So I've got 2 questions for you. Who are you imitating? And who's imitating you? These are questions, guys, that we need to wrestle with as a church. Paul wrote in the same letter, earlier on in chapter 11, he says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." So who are we following? And who is following us? Because it's often a thing that's not in the forefront of our mind in church. We're kind of caught up with family and the busyness of life, and we don't often think about discipleship as being a really key part of our Christian experience. We kind of just get into the habit of, this is kind of what we do, and we go to church, and Paul's really quite purposeful in his endeavours to grow another generation. And none of us are exempt for these questions. My mentor, I think he's 67, thereabouts. He might even be older. Bob is in the place in life of asking himself these questions on a regular basis. His need of Jesus is greater now than it was when he was a young guy. His passion and his desire for Jesus is greater now than it was when he was a young guy. And in the conversations I have with him, he's constantly inspiring and pushing and cheering me on to have that same mind. He, as an individual, has taught me how to be a dad. He's taught me how to be a husband. He's comforted me when I failed. He's cheered me on when I've had a win. and he puts an arm round me when I preach for an hour. And he laughed harder than he probably should have at receiving that news. But that's all right. Because this process of discipleship, we really all should wear a big L plate. Yeah? Because we're all learner disciples, aren't we? If you think you've mastered this, you're wrong. You've not. None of us have. Some of us are winging it. Others are doing this stuff better. So that's who I'm following. So I've closely associated and attached myself to Bob Hawthorne for the last 15 years. He's been a constant source of rich blessing in my life and in my family's life. He is my go-to when things are uncertain. He's often an anchor when I have to make big decisions. He's the guy that'll run things through because he's trusted. He's trusted. He's been walking with God for a long, long, long number of years. I'm going to sound like a horrible chauvinist right now. I promise you I'm not. I've got OCD. And I just like things that are neat and tidy and clean and orderly. It's kind of how I'm made up. And I have a pet hate for dishes. Like, I can't understand it. Like, if you use a plate, you just wash it. Yeah? If you use a cup, just wash the cup. Amanda, whom I love, and who is the best mum to our children and the most wonderful wife, will use 5 cups instead of just the same one 5 times. And I remember one day sitting and having a moan about this to Bob and saying, Bob, blinking wash a cup. Like, is it so hard? And this is the beautiful thing about discipleship. When we enter into these deep and intimate, rich relationships, Bob will say things to me that nobody else will. And it will land in a way that it wouldn't land if it came from anyone else. And Bob said to me, Davy, did it ever occur to you that your wife is raising 3 phenomenal children? Did it ever occur to you that she has far more on her plate than 5 bloody cups? He said, we've to love our wives as Christ loves the church, Davy. He said, so here's a gig, kid. See, when you come home, just wash the cups. And thank God that you have a beautiful wife and 3 incredible children. Now, there's a bit of humour in that story and that interaction, but there's a deeply profound truth in it also. Yeah? It's that I should love my wife as though Christ loves the church. I should lay my life down for her. And it took that elder guy to poke me in the ribs in the minute and remind me of that beautiful truth. So that's who I'm following. But who's following me? So in my work at the City Mission, as much as I am responsible for supporting guys who are homeless and who are trapped in addiction of various kinds, I think the bigger part of my responsibility is to be an incredibly faithful witness in their lives of the goodness of God and of the provision of the Father, and to instruct them in ways to engage in authentic things of faith. And it's a thing that's hard. It's really hard. It doesn't come with a list of instructions, and often the instructions that come are written for a context that doesn't really match the work that we do at the City Mission. But here's the thing. Our guys are hungry for things of faith. I know that the young people I speak to in church are hungry for the things of faith. I know that when I engage people in conversation about the things of faith in church, there's something takes place in them where they come alive. All of us have this yearning. It just means that we need to be intentional, we need to be purposeful in entering into these type conversations, often and a lot. So again, the question here is, who are we following and who is following us? Just going to leave that hanging in the air for about 30 seconds. Who are we following? Who's influencing you? Who's following us? And who am I influencing? Because the growth of the church is dependent upon these truths. It's why I said that none of us are immune to these questions. They affect every single one of us sitting in this room. So Paul and Timothy, what can we say? Paul had a deep affection and a high regard for Timothy. Throughout his letters, Paul expressed his feelings and his sentiments about Timothy, portraying him as a beloved and faithful companion in ministry. In Philippians, he writes, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I may also be cheered when I receive news about you. Listen to this. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests and not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served me in the work of the gospel. Notice those two things that he points out about Timothy. He says that he has no one else like him, and that he has served with a son with his father in the work of the gospel. So the father there is Paul. Yeah? So, I'm asking you lots of questions today, but I don't apologise one bit. Who are our children in the faith? I don't mean my own children. I don't mean Alfie, Jack and Joy, the whirlwinds that are downstairs causing trouble right now. I mean, who are my children in the faith? Who are our children in the faith? Who are the people that we are pouring into and investing in? I'm convinced of this. Had it not been for Bob Hawthorne, I might be dead today. And I'm not saying that flippantly or lightly. I'm saying that in the realest way possible. I was a deeply troubled young man when I came about the church. And if it wasn't for those individuals who put a hand around my shoulder and schooled me and nursed me and comforted me, I have no idea where I might be today. Maybe you're sitting here in this moment thinking, I probably should invest in others. Maybe you have some influence that could spur on a young brother or sister in the faiths. Folks, we need to be investing in others. It's the difference between authentic, transformational faith and simple church attendance. The latter doesn't always produce transformation in my experience, but deep, intimate relationships do. You'll need to apologise, I'm having to use a Word document on my computer today. We are yet to adult well enough to have a printer at home. So, this investing in others, I thought I would take just a couple of minutes to pick that apart in Amanda and I's own life. So a number of years ago, in the church that Amanda and I were attending, we had a group of individuals in the church who were no longer youth, but they were no longer considered the adults like the rest of us. Yeah? You know that weird category where they don't really belong anywhere, they don't really belong to any one group. Well, it's that category that a lot of people decide to bail from church in, because there's not enough people paying attention to their ongoing development and their faith and their relationship with God. And Amanda and I felt quite challenged by this. It was eased by the fact that we liked a lot of them. They were good kids. And we had a tiny wee flat and we had a newborn son at the time, and I had a terrible, terrible salary. I mean, we were broke. And we decided to make ourselves available, and I went and I spoke to the pastor and said, look, would you be okay if we just started a wee house group? And we'll begin to just unpack the scriptures with the young people in our church. And he was doing backflips. He was saying, absolutely, please would somebody do this? So we did. And Amanda used to go to Aldi's, and she would spend a £5 that we never had on the worst pizza you've ever eaten. But do you know what? See, those young people, they loved that group. And we grew delivering that group. Now, when it came time for us to move on for that church, which we did after a number of years, somebody else now runs that very same group. At one point, we had 30-odd people in our living room. People from our own church, friends of theirs, colleagues of theirs, people who had no background in church whatsoever. By the end of the night, our room would smell of feet and breath and cheap pizza. But it's been some of the best times I've ever had. And I know from speaking to them, it's been some of the best times that they've ever had. One of them went on to do a course with Bethel. And I'm convinced that if this young woman is continued to be invested in, that at some point she will be in full-time ministry. She's a beautiful soul. But it took for somebody to step out and say, actually, I'm going to make myself available. I'm going to give up my time and I'm going to invest in this person. Barry Murphy. Some of you know Barry, yeah? Yeah? Barry is every bit of Timothy. He is absolutely every bit of Timothy. He is a boy who, from the day I met him, has set himself apart. Even in his most broken state, he knew he needed to change. And we sent him to rehab, and the reports back were just phenomenal. It's like, this guy's alive. He is constantly reading the Bible. He's set himself apart for all the carry-on in the house. And when it came time for him to finish, I was desperate to get him back to the City Mission to continue the work of the gospel. And I spoke to him, and he had the wisdom enough in the moment to say it's too soon. So we arranged for him to go to Nottingham, and he spent some time down there. And again, the reports back were that this boy has set himself apart. This man has set himself apart. He is different. So when the time came for him to return to Scotland, he was on the phone to me, David, are there any opportunities at the City Mission? So what little influence I have at the City Mission, I was able to get him onto our intern programme. And he entered our intern programme, and he set apart himself for the work of the gospel. And he is far better than Tim or I or any of the other staff, if I'm honest. I said this to Phil recently. His incredible witness in that place is felt by everyone. Us as staff, on looking him on and cheering him on, and dare I say it, being challenged by his good works. And the guys under him, the guys that we're ministering to, Barry doesn't need to come in with big fancy formulas. Barry's presence alone in that space is enough to cause our guys to think. So Paul consistently affirms Timothy. In the opening letter, in the opening of his second letter to Timothy, addresses him as my dear son. So you hinted at that earlier, as Father Heart. So the passages mentioned today and others demonstrate Paul's deep appreciation for Timothy's character, dedication and service in ministry. Paul saw Timothy as a trusted and cherished companion, entrusting him with important responsibilities and considering him a spiritual son in the faith. In many ways, Timothy was a seasoned minister of the gospel, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that when they met, he was still a relatively young man. He was in his late teens, early 20s. And not long after that, he's endowed with this weighty mantle of organising the then church, the emerging church. So we read about their encounter in the book of Acts, chapter 16, verse 1 through 3. It says, Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy, whose mother was Jewish and a believer and whose father was a Greek. The believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. So again, for the very earliest mention of Timothy, there was something that was set apart in this young man. And I guarantee you that every single one of us in this room right now know a young man like Timothy who needs a father or a mother to nurture and encourage their faith. Paul wanted to take him on the journey, so he circumcised him because the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Now, if you remember one of the 375 points I made the last time I was here, Paul's big bugbear at the time was circumcision. And here he is circumcising Timothy. Kind of, it's like this juxtaposition. It seems odd. The reason for it is that Paul always began in the synagogue, and to have an uncircumcised Jew would have made any witness to the Jews that bit more difficult. I don't know about you, but it's a price that I wouldn't have been willing to pay. It's circumcision. Not a chance. Paul sent Timothy to various locations throughout his missionary journeys. We've already mentioned Corinth and Philippi. But he was also sent to Thessalonica with the instructions to strengthen and encourage the believers there. He sent him to Ephesus, a significant city in Asia Minor. It was during this period that Paul writes 1 and 2 Timothy, instructing him on how to lead the church in Ephesus and address certain issues that had arisen there. So, what instructions does the mentor offer the mentee in this, the last exchange? So just to build the point a wee bit, we're not sure where Paul was when writing 1 Timothy, but we know in 2 Timothy he was absolutely in prison. We know because he says that his life was poured out like a drink offering. I think Paul knew at that point the game's up. The game's a bogey, as we used to say in Greenock. And this was his last hurrah to give the young Timothy, the emerging church leader, some sound instruction. And he says this in the opening verses of 1 Timothy. The aim of our charge is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. One of the primary concerns in Ephesus at the time was the presence of false teachers who were promoting false doctrine, engaging in speculative discussions. And Timothy was tasked with it to address this false teaching and ensure the soundness of the church's doctrine. The false teaching resulted in meaningless speculation, and the task that Timothy was given was to teach proper apostolic teaching that resulted in practical good behaviour rooted in love. And that love must come from an internal spirit work change that produces a pure heart rather than one filled with sinful desires, a good conscience rather than one laden with guilt, and a sincere faith rather than the pretense and hypocrisy. Paul instructs Timothy and the believers to lead peaceful and quiet lives, godly and dignified in every way. The charge for all of us is love that comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. This gospel that we follow is intended to change our lives. I said it before. Church on a Sunday is amazing and it's beautiful to gather together, and I love the church. But it doesn't often lead to the transformation that the gospel intends. And the gospel does intend it. No, I'm going to go for it. I was going to miss this, but get time. Paul says to Timothy, if you point these things out, brothers and sisters, you will be a good minister of Jesus Christ, nourished on the truths of the faith and the good teaching that you have followed. Have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourselves to be godly. Train ourselves to be godly. He goes on to say, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to preaching and teaching. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them. When I read those, I was deeply challenged by it. I wonder if we went all away this week and just chewed over those very verses there and ask ourselves the question honestly, am I diligently seeking after these things? Am I diligently taking the truths that I learn from them and am I passing them on to somebody else? Why does he say it to him? He says, so that everyone may see your progress. Watch your life and your doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearer. It's just the perfect template, again, of discipleship, of we receive truth through the Spirit and we pass on that truth to others. What am I being influenced by and who am I influencing? The focus here is on how Timothy, by his teaching and lifestyle, can help the church persevere in the face of false teaching. And then his final charge. He says, but you, man of God, we could do 45 minutes just on that, but we won't, I promise. He says, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, and endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight. But you, men and women of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. In preparation, I found this quote. It's by Michael F. Bird, who wrote a book along with N.T. Wright, The New Testament in Its World. If you don't have a copy, you should probably get one. It's brilliant. And he says this about the pastoral epistles. The pastorals are not wooden, overly doctrinal or dogmatic. They are bound with an emphasis on doing good deeds and living a life of faith. It is not enough to have good doctrine. One must be devoted to good things. If we follow the example of our best leaders, then we will in turn be an example to others and be the people whom Jesus redeemed in order to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. So I'm going to simply finish with this. Who is discipling you? If you think you're exempt from that question, then you're wrong. Humbly, you're wrong. And who are you discipling? If you think you're exempt from that question, then again, humbly, you're wrong. And if you don't know the answer, please, can I suggest that this week you take some time and you read 1 and 2 Timothy and you find inspiration on the page and you ask God, who should I pass these truths on to? And he will speak. He will speak and he will show you. Amen.